Merci à ceux qui étaient là le matin d'être revenus et merci aux nouvelles personnes qui nous rejoignent en ce moment. Ce matin, nous avons ouvert le forum par des sessions notamment sur les villes africaines. Nous allons continuer cet après-midi avec une session notamment sur la problématique du digital dans les villes africaines et en quoi cet outil de la digitalisation permet la transformation des villes africaines en termes de conditions de vie pour les populations. Et ensuite, on va ouvrir la série des tables rondes sur la zone de libre-échange en Afrique. On va faire une seule session cet après-midi et continuer le reste demain. Donc, cette table ronde se fera essentiellement en anglais et nous avons la chance d'accueillir M. Clovis qui tout à l'heure va intervenir et M. Sébastien va assurer tout à l'heure la modération de cette table ronde. Nous aurons une intervention depuis le Rwanda de la part de M. Alexis et comme pour les autres tables rondes, il s'agira essentiellement de faire dialoguer à la fois les intervenants, mais aussi recueillir les questions du public, notamment ceux qui sont en ligne, pour que cette session-là soit la plus vivante possible. OK. As on every continent, Africa has also taken the path of the technological revolution with its limits and its hopes. There is an undeniable digital dynamics driven by an abundance of innovation in all areas: food, transport, financial transactions. There is great potential for developing the continent's economic activity through digital technologies. There is great potential, but the question is to see to what extent these digital dynamics can help to improve the living conditions of human population in terms of economic development, particularly informal, and access to essential goods, health, education, water, food, and housing. So I let the floor to Mr. Sébastien for this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didier. Okay, so you're in mind. Welcome, Mr. Fouer. Welcome, Mr. Sabenzi Gatoni. Are you online?
Yes, I am online.
Glad to hear you. Okay, to go straight forward, I would say digital for improving living condition in Africa, yea or nay? Mr. Gatoni?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Sorry.
Oh.
Hello.
Oh, sorry. I said to be straightforward, digital for improving living conditions in Africa, yea or nay? Yes or no?
Yes or no is always not the easiest to answer. A qualified yes, let's say.
Yeah. Why so?
Because there's always the details, like they say, the devil is in the details, you know. There's a lot, technology can do a lot of good, but it has to be based on other analog prerequisites, including governance, education, that need to be there for the digital to bring development. Also, development is a contested term, as I will explain in a minute. Development needs to be understood in a context. So those are the reasons why I say it's a qualified yes.
Definitely. Mr. Frey?
Yes, thank you for the question. I could not agree more with my colleague. I think that is also qualified. Yes, it has as a tool can be used for development, but also requires many other things to be in place, including for it to be solving the right problems. Sometimes also we have to deal with the potential unintended consequences of it as well. So, but for sure, if guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, if taking in consideration the real needs of the people that will use this technology, and I believe as my colleague Alexis will also mention, if it's not only considering people as users of technology, but also as producers of technology, then it can do quite a lot of good work for development.
And on the side of people producing technology, would you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, I'll be pleased to, but I also know that Alexis will be talking more about that. So would you mind that if I pass the question to Alexis? Alexis, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes, for sure. So I think technology, especially digital technology, is one of those areas that is very sensitive in its production, that is very sensitive to things like education and development. And as you just explained, overall, technology to make a difference needs to be contextualized. And that contextualization comes with not only use, but also production. And as I will explain, I think in my presentation, I'll show that in some of the examples in Kigali, there were some offers of apps or softwares that did a lot of good, but their limits were because they were not locally produced. Because they were not locally produced, they didn't fully understand the local needs, and therefore couldn't make the desired impact 100%. So therefore, people need to move beyond just using technology from wherever it comes from and move into producing their own technology that is sensitive to the context. And that requires the things that I've already mentioned, education and good governance.
Yeah, if I could also add to it, I think that not only the technology, but also innovations using the technology, right? New goods and services that are new to the economy, may not be new to the world, there may be things that are already been doing in other places using technology, using digital technology, but on the context of developing country may be an innovation. And that's important that those also come from developing countries. So if we take into consideration these people as not only consumers, but producers, I think that is a very important message that we have to take for developing countries.
Okay, but if I may, it depends on a fertile environment and for the creation of new technologies and for those technologies to be scalable, no?
Yes, indeed. There are a lot of course, examples of use of technology and digital technology in developing country context, and many of them doesn't go out of the pilot phase, right? How to scale it up? For sure, it requires many other things that Alexis hinted, you know, analog things, also as complementary infrastructure and technology that are required, including the basic electricity. Africa is the continent where electricity is still a problem. Most of people without electricity today live in Africa. So it's basic for any kind of, if we want to achieve any of the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, if you want to not spoil food, you have to have a refrigerator. You need to have electricity. You need to education, kids to be able to study after hours and so on. And you know, I can go on and on how is important that. So any of those complementary infrastructures and other elements are required for scaling up the use. But I also think that they should not be taken as an impediment for us to not move on that direction, right? Because we will not be able to, if we have to wait for all problems to be solved to start to use technology and you start to use these digital technologies, then there's is a very difficult situation, right? So these things goes hand in hand, they co-evolve, but for sure that is a challenge.
It requires a lot of preconditions, by the way.
Yes, there are things that are indeed preconditions. Of course, you need to have electricity somehow to have digital technology, right? You have to have connectivity as well, because mostly of the digital technology today, infrastructure requires connectivity. So things are, and skills, people how to use that. So there are prerequisites, but what I'm trying to say is that you can also build them together. So you don't need to have everything ready at that point to then now we will be able to use the technology.
Okay, would you have some examples of success stories on this field?
Of course, one can always mention what we can see as big success story in terms of use of technology for finance inclusion. In case of M-Pesa, for example, in Africa. There are other examples, I believe Alexis could mention and go deep on that, like the use of drones to deliver medical supplies and so on. But I think we should be more interested on not this particular use of technology like this, but how do we see this digital technology percolating into the productive sectors and being used in it? And we conducted a survey in 500 last year, 500 firms of small, medium, and large size in Ghana. And to have an idea of the adoption of technologies in the productive sector. And it's very clear that most of them are already using social media, already using basic of e-commerce, you know. But when you start to go more sophisticated technologies and digital technologies, then the numbers go down quite a lot, including in large firms. In this survey, we ask, including artificial intelligence, robots, cobots, you know, and things like that, and the numbers go down. But surprisingly, that is not even in emerging economies as Brazil and you know, Turkey. The number is not that high in the informal sector, smaller companies. That shows that we may have already internalized quite a lot of use of digital technology as users, but not use them in the productive sectors of these countries. And that is still a challenge, including in Africa.
Mr. Gattoni, on this?
Yes, I quite agree. As I just said, there are success stories, and I think he gave some of them. For example, the M-Pesa, which we originated in Kenya, was really a revolutionary development in the tech sector. And I think part of the success, as I will always insist, was the ability to understand the context. For example, if you see M-Pesa in Kenya, it was later that it developed, for example, the app that could be used on smartphones. It was a later development. When it came, it developed a system that could be used by feature phones, not necessarily smartphones. And these feature phones are phones that people in Kenya and in Africa in general could afford, which meant that the M-Pesa, the money transfer was adopted widely in Kenya because it understood the economic context using feature phones. And later you see, for example, in Switzerland now, people have Twint, which more or less is like, it's like a M-Pesa, let's say, a similar concept anyway, but that was later. So this is an example where we see that the production or development was done in Africa and then adopted around the world, or not adopted, variants, different, of course, coding and programming ways, but more or less the same product. So for me, I think these are the keys for scalability and for success stories, this ability to understand the context and give a technology that people not only can use, but also can experiment with and be part of the production chain, not just the use. So if we come, for example, in Rwanda, if we come in Rwanda, there are also a number of examples. I think he mentioned a zip line, which is used for medical supplies and especially blood, because Rwanda, as you might know, is reputed as the country of 1,000 hills, which is positive in terms of landscape, but a bit of a problem for transport, you know, when it comes to building roads. So that has been a development to deliver blood using drones, and yeah, that has been a development. But I still come to the basics of governance, to the basics of contextualization. That what helps companies to succeed and scale and respond to the real needs of the population.
Okay, I have two questions that are popping in mind. The one is, we have quite a romantic view of someone discovering something on his own, but what should be, I would say, the role of the states on this technological train, and what is the aspect of financing?
Right. So if I could start, that's of course it's a very multi-layered question there, right? So before I go into that, let me just tell you on our view from UNCTAD, we see that we don't see only one wave of technological change with digitalization. Actually, we see two waves. You know, these technological change and big technological revolutions, they are processes that play out for a long time. It's like 50 years. The people that study this process of technological revolutions, they have counted 5 since the Industrial Revolution. We call today the new Industry 4.0. So in a way, in the view of the World Economic Forum, there was 3 before, but people actually see 5 of them. And after the Industrial Revolution. And the thing is that these 5 technological revolutions only increase the gap between developed and developing countries. You know, the income per capita difference between income per capita of developed and developing country at the beginning of Industrial Revolution was very small. Major difference between 2 people at random in the world was related to class, if you were from aristocrat or not. 80% was that. Today, 80% of 2 people, difference of 2 people, 80% of income is the place that the person was born. So it's the lottery of the birthplace. So these technological revolutions not necessarily will close the gaps, right? It's actually have increased the gap so far. And the digital revolution, you can trace back its beginning to the 80s and 70s, last century. And then we see that we are at the mature phase of that wave of technological change. So basically at the end of it. And since we are at the end of it, people are looking for what is the next one. So the Industry 4.0, green technology, the next one. Of course, the problem is the next one is based on the previous one, is based on the digital one. So the gap on digital will carry forward, right? But the thing is that these technologies, of course, there are sectors that are the sectors that invent the technology, right? Is the Silicon Valley in the US and so on. But a lot of the gains are in using the technology on traditional sectors to change the way that people do the traditional things, produce the traditional things, right? So if that is the case, countries that don't produce much things will not have much to benefit because they are not producing many things, right? So they can use this technology to improve the few things that they produce. So the first thing that countries should do and governments should take care is to develop in developing countries and in Africa is to diversify their economies. Countries should diversify their economy. Governments should continue trying to diversify their economies. Most of African countries are commodity dependent countries, meaning that over 60% of their exports is commodity. And when you are in that situation, it's very bad because you don't set the price of these commodities in the international market. Any drop in price and volatility, it affects your governmental revenues and affects then the money that you can use for education, health, and so on. So that's the first one. The second thing is that countries should really push to close the gap on the current technological revolution, the digital one. When a technological revolution plays out, the country that developed the technology, the developed country, it develops the technology using the production sectors, change consumption patterns, change infrastructure, changing institutions, everything at the same time. Those things come together. But when this technology goes from developed countries to developing countries, this process do not come together. What comes first is infrastructure change and changing consumption patterns. So you have, even with all the problems that we have in Africa and other developing regions, you have cell phones, smartphones, internet. We have to do much better than we do, but we do have the infrastructure there. And we have the consumption pattern of the digital age, e-commerce, in the buyer side, buying things, right? The last things that comes to developing countries is the change in the production pattern, in the production sectors using the technology. And that's what government should really promote. And how they can do that? They can do that by using technology in the government process itself, e-government, by adopting technology on things that can be used, e-health, can be used for people that are in rural areas that don't have the doctors there, they can have access to e-health. And so those digital, when we bring the digital to all these areas, e-education and so on, and then push for digitalization of productive sectors, of SMEs, so that's, and how you do that? Through incentivizing the adoption of technology. So you can use subsidies, you can use tax breaks for companies that adopt new technologies and so on. Incentivizing the building skills, in schools, so people can use and so on. So that is the second point, to use the current technology, digital technology. And the third one is that already look at the next wave of technological change, because this next wave of Industry 4.0, AI, blockchain, drones, robots, and so on, and green energy as well. This wave is coming, and all countries are interested to join the value chains of this new wave. And what we see is that in the previous technological revolutions, when countries were able to catch up, was always at the beginning of a technological revolution, never at the middle and never at the end. So when the US and Germany were able to catch up with UK, with Britain, that was at the beginning of the mass production. When the Asian countries, Fordism and mass production of cars, when the Asian countries in the 70s and 80s were able to catch up, like economies like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, and so on, it was at the beginning of the digital technological revolution. And now is the beginning of a new one, is the time to do that. So, of course, countries where less technologically advanced countries, they have less resources to do so. The second part was resource, so they do have less resources, but they have to start. They have to start with pilot projects. They have to start promoting innovation labs, makers lab, bringing that to universities, and promoting the idea with the private sector. So there are many ways, policy instruments to do that. But I would say those three aspects, and we can further discuss finance, but otherwise I will monopolize here.
Yes. Yeah, I think for your question on the loan developer and the loan, the genius who invents everything, if I understood it correctly, I think you rightly called it a myth, because to a great extent, it's really a myth. That's not, of course, to me that there are no geniuses, because geniuses are there. But I think the digital turn, the digital evolution, and as everyone who has maybe tried to code knows, depends on the collective collective development and collective effort. For example, you might be aware of the sites like GitHub, which is like social media for coders, where they put codes, they reposit codes, and these codes are used, and you see a lot of apps and some of the world-leading apps being developed based on this input from more or less everyone, because GitHub is open to everyone to repose, to put the code, and these codes are used. It's sites like Stack Overflow, for those of you who have started, who have experienced a little bit of coding, knows that Stack Overflow is like the essential toolkit of a developer, of a programmer. And these are collective efforts. These are sites that help developers, and these are collective the efforts. So I think, in the sense, what you say that the lone developer, the lone wolf developer who invents everything is really a myth. And coming back to how, as societies or as international organizations or universities, we should think about it, I think we need to really make sure that this collective effort that people, individual, private people, base on to develop, of course, using their geniuses to develop their apps, need also to reflect in the product. I think it's not fully fair that people develop these based on collective effort and the rewards are only individual. And I think the institutional, the legal, the financial system need to reflect these collective efforts that people profit from to develop their apps. And I think, talking of Africa in particular, I think we need to understand, and it's most visible in Africa, but I think it's all over the world. It's true. I think every technology depends. The scaling technology depends on society. Scale is basically society. It's your capacity to sell to more than one person, to society. And I think in the African continent, this understanding of the community and the society is also, in a sense, a technology. There's actually a Togolese anthropologist and a technologist who has developed this concept that society, social interaction are in themselves also a form of technology, and they need to be valorized, given value, because those are things that help people to be successful in a sense. Yes, I think that's what I would say. The finance side, I'm not an expert on finance, but all I'm saying is that it needs to reflect not just individual effort of geniuses, but also collective and societal efforts that go into these apps.
Thank you very much. Thibaut, is there any question online, maybe?
Okay. The question is in French. I can translate if you want, or do you understand French? So it's Ferdinand from Burundi who asked, les nouvelles technologies aident beaucoup dans le développement des pays, mais certains pays restent en arrière en matière d'utiliser les TIC dans le transfert d'argent pour cause le débit de l'Internet est trop bas. Je peux citer par exemple l'exemple du Burundi. J'aimerais savoir comment ces problèmes de connectivité à Internet peuvent être résolus dans certains pays et comment les populations peuvent-elles trouver des solutions.
What should be made on this?
No, that's what I was saying. That the infrastructure is critical. So for sure, some infrastructure is something that the government can provide. Some infrastructure is clearly the private sector role to play. Whereas we see in many countries, the private sector is the one that really pushed for the digitalization and internet and connectivity. So how to do that? Yes. We have to see situations of different countries, but be sure that the government have to ensure that there is a competition in the provision of these services, right? So whenever you have the competition, you tend to have companies trying to provide a better services with a lower price. So that is one thing for sure. In many countries, of course, the last mile, the problem is really much worse in rural areas, and also affordability is not high in rural areas. So it's like a chicken and egg problem. It's because it's where most of the poor population is based, and of course for the private sector it's not economically rentable. So that's why as I was telling, those things have to be solved at the same time. So push for improvement of infrastructure, and push for diversification of the economy and creation of jobs. You have more increased household incomes that will be able to pay for those services and so on. But yeah, it's not an easy fix for sure. Yeah.
Okay, and on this, would it be possible to consider at the same time a low-tech improvements, especially on rural areas, that could have a big impact on agricultural sector and so on, and a high-tech improvement mainly in cities or I don't know, in rural areas as well, but finance and scalable?
Yes, for sure. There are a lot of scope for low-tech, let's say low-tech technology in rural areas, including feature phones that can send messages with price of inputs, agriculture inputs, so the farmers can know what are the price, or price of the produce, so they know when to sell and so on. information how to use fertilizers, how to use patterns of irrigation. There are many things. Of course, knowledge is very important for agriculture. So you can use technology that is not very high tech. You don't need smartphones for that, but you could, of course, you could use smartphones for that, but you can still have that. But so whatever we can have, whatever technology is there, we should use. I'm saying that we should use whatever we really should use, and if it provides a good service, we will see farmers, family farmers using a cell phone, and because we see that in developing countries already. So, but I don't think that we should have this in mind, like this is the technology for this is for the poor, this is for the rich. I think it's really to see what is the problem, how can be solved, economically. The price of gadgets, the price of technology is going down, it's continue going down. So you never know what kind of technology they'll be able to use. Earlier this year, I was in a city in Brazil that exports 85% of fruits of Brazil. And we were there to talk about the use of frontier technology for family farmers. So use of drones, use of this and that. And I myself was a little bit skeptical of use of drones, for example, for small farmers, right? And but then I asked the family farmers, would you like to use the drone? And then we learned that with the drone you can detect disease in the plantation many days before you can see with your naked eye, because it can see different spectrum of light. So one woman there, family farmer, she was telling me, Clovis, we are family farmers, but we have the certificate to export. And to export, they only have 10 hectares, but to export, we have to assign someone to take care of to see if there are diseases in the plants. And I'm the one that do that. So every day I have to go to my plantation, my 10 hectares, select 10 trees. Each tree I collect 9 leaves. I have to analyze the leaves and say that I have done that. But I am also the driver. I'm also do the accountant part of our family farm. I also have to take care of my kid. So if there is a drone that can just pass here, once a week, and we share that with the cooperative, I want that drone. So the technology could be advanced, but it has to be one that solves the problem of the people on the ground.
Yeah, and especially on this, won't it be, I would say, sometime a blank check for a more intensive farming, for instance, or to more emission of CO2, if we just keep on developing without proper reflection the technology?
Yeah, for sure. Not only in the case of agriculture, but in any case. So we have to really have to consider the potential and intended consequence of technology, right? Not only the ones that you have mentioned, but bias on the use of technology. We see that on AI and other things, right? Gene editing technology. There is a lot of ethical issues involved on that. So all the potential negative impacts of the technology, including on jobs, right? So they have to be considered by the government as well.
Mr. Gattoni, on the counter effects of potential counter effects, I would say, of technologies.
Okay, I'll put it together with the question on affordability, and I'll come back to the negative effects of technology. I think the person who asked the question, Ferdinand, was right, because when you look at, for example, the study conducted by the International Telecommunication Union, the ITU, it showed, for example, that if you take Africa as a continent, an average African uses close to 5.3% of his or her income for my mobile data. So it takes in 5.3%, while the average in the world is 1.3% for mobile data. So this question of affordability and which is of course more pronounced in Africa, has to do of course with the level of income that people have. And to me, it really invites us to think, to rethink technology really generally, because this affordability is a result of a huge supply chain that makes it unaffordable. I think Clovis has touched most of it in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the import, the export, the capacity of government to borrow. All those things affect this unaffordability. In a sense, it's something that is sending us to think technology in general and the economy in general, this unaffordability. And then on the question of the contrary or the negative effects of technology, I think we have to be careful and see that sometimes scaling, what the companies call scaling, is sometimes financializing the poor. So it's basically just putting the poor in the system or in the financial system, which does not necessarily or not always mean that the poor has become rich. It just means that now he has been financialized. We can monitor how much he has and how much we have more control on. He's more legible, he's visible, which has its positive and negative effects. So I think we have to be careful to question technology and to question the hype around technology, because there is the reality. Technology is of course a revolutionary thing. There is a digital term that is revolutionary, but also there is a hype. In this, I'm thinking, for example, in what I study most, things like smart cities, what people call smart cities. So, and these are supposed to be cities that are led and that are led by technology, with digital devices being in the city and helping the urban life in the city. But when you really analyze where they have been applied in Africa, you see that it's very difficult, first of all, to know what it is. And sometimes it's just that the companies that are developing this technology also conceptualize this concept to be able to market and sell their products, which people can have different views on what that is. But I think there is that element of hype that needs to be questioned and come back to reality and see that technology doesn't always say what it says, at least what the producer says. And that's perhaps not not a particularity of digital technology. It's what many producers of other things are inclined to do. But I think when it comes to technology, there is a blind faith in technology, that technology in by itself can solve problems and it's always positive. So I think we need to question that hype, to question that capacity to disrupt. And I think in the process, that's where we come up with a contextualized product that are able to respond to local and the real problems, and that are sustainable. I think you raised the very question of sustainability of CO2 emissions. And I think one of the striking number that I think that I've heard is that 1% of electricity in the world is used to watch YouTube videos. So I think I would be willing to dig deeper for people to have discussions around that in terms of CO2 emissions, YouTube YouTube is not neutral, let's say that. And it's just an example, but there are also a lot of discussions that need to happen around technology without necessarily buying the hype and the promise of technology that sometimes are not realized. Thanks.
Don't you think that it's also a matter of confidence? I mean, sure, I think the role of fundamental research might be important, and the networking, and to foster the convictions and the confidence of innovators in Africa.
Yes, for sure. Particularly because of a lot of this, the innovation ecosystem of this technology is very global. You have to be part of communities to really understand what's going on and be able to innovate. So for sure, and it doesn't require much. In a way, you need a connection and you can participate in these global networks. GitHub, for the ones that do programming, you can go there and see what are doing, collaborate, and so on. Just an example, right? So that is one thing that we should foster, these ecosystems of innovation, not only the internationally, but as well locally, regionally, in Africa, for example, in sub-regions, regional. I think that's very important to have that.
Would you have any clue on how to achieve this?
I think that with the African Continuum Free Trade Agreement now and the possibility to have value chains in Africa, you know, more producing things locally, not only extracting commodities and exporting them, I think creates a lot of opportunity and scopes for those things. So you can start with closer collaboration, university collaboration, and through these more formal institutions. So universities can collaborate more with other universities from the continent, right? You can in the area of digital, the digital ecosystem is very dynamic. So you always have in the countries, you have accelerator labs, you have startup hubs, you have all these ecosystems for the digital, and you can put them together, through they can see Africa as an opportunity to connect. Not only, sometimes they are very well connected with abroad. I believe, including colleagues in Rwanda, they are very well connected with, Silicon Valley and other places, including the Zipline is one example of that. But there are scope also to connect and collaborate within Africa. Yeah.
Yes, and to correspond basically to African people needs, because as long as I know, Zipline is an American company, but actually this works in Rwanda. But why an African company cannot make such Zipline or things like that?
No, for sure. No, yeah, that's nothing that an African company could not do if they are really intent to go into that direction, right? And there are opportunities because the needs are there. The same need that you have in Rwanda, you have in other countries with similar geography challenges in terms of reaching out different places. So there is also the scope, and sometimes it's easier to do that in a country that has other. For example, I understand that in the case of this particular example of use of drones for this particular activity for medical supplies and so on, I understand that was easier to do also in Rwanda than maybe easier to implement that in other countries, because you have in the developed country, you may have a lot of regulations that for infrastructure that already exist, for air traffic, this and that, and maybe easier to implement in another setting. As it was faster, the development of M-Pesa for same thing. You don't have other technologies and systems that are traditional that were not able to move as fast, and there you could move much faster, right?
Yeah, and what do you think of the role model of some Indian conglomerates like Tata, for example, that was built literally from the slum and managed to be one of the leading companies in the world?
Yes, I think that it's critical for developing countries in Africa to foster big companies as well. We have to take care of the SMEs, but we also have to have the big companies. And how they become big? They become big when they are not doing the same thing that they were doing when they begin. They are conglomerate because they are diversified portfolio. They start to produce many different things. They buy other companies to join different markets. They create employment in several areas, right? So they provide opportunity for people to learn through this business, and maybe they, before they decide to retire and open their own company, create the knowledge. So for sure, this should be fostered. This kind of things should be promoted.
And initially from very day-to-day competencies on marketing and innovation.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Is there any question maybe? Yeah.
Moi, j'ai pas de questions à poser, mais j'ai juste un témoignage. Par rapport à M-Pesa, en fait, j'étais au Kenya quand on a vraiment implémenté le M-Pesa. J'ai vu le changement énorme que ça représentait pour les gens. Parce que transporter de l'argent en Afrique, c'est compliqué. Il y a du racketing dans les matatu. Et donc là, les parents qui habitaient à 300 km de Nairobi pouvaient envoyer de l'argent à l'école, pour financer au collège, pour financer les enseignements. Les paysans, c'était aussi assez extraordinaire comme progrès, parce que d'un coup, ils pouvaient recevoir l'argent sans devoir se déplacer. Ou bien, enfin, il y a énormément d'exemples, mais ça représentait une considérable amélioration d'avoir justement cette mobilité des flux financiers dans l'ensemble du pays. C'était assez incroyable.
Yeah, I'll speak in English. One thing I find amazing is that there's so many good ideas and so on coming out of Africa, and trying to find financing for them is impossible, especially from the West. If you take financing in Africa, it's with outrageous interest rates. And why can't, that's one thing I want to do, is to finance all these startups and so on that we've created down there. One of them is called Exportunity, which is, I shouldn't say it, but it's like an Alibaba for Africa. It's been around for 10 years. We've been fairly successful, but we're lacking financing. Come on. I mean, when are people going to wake up? When is R&D in Africa going to become an important part of the government's budget? It's zero now.
Oui, je m'appelle Benoît, je travaille depuis 10 ans sur une petite structure qui s'appelle Médias sociaux pour un autre monde, et qui a pour but de promouvoir effectivement l'utilisation des smartphones, des applications et des réseaux sociaux en Afrique de l'Ouest pour révolutionner un petit peu le développement, entre guillemets, avec les organisations de base. Je donne des formations et des prestations de services sur ce côté-là. Il y a deux choses qui me paraissent très intéressantes à souligner, c'est qu'effectivement, comme pour M-Pesa, comme pour Zipline, l'innovation vient d'Afrique. Et ça, c'est très intéressant pour l'Afrique. Enfin, les Africains sont très fiers et ils ont de quoi être fiers du fait qu'ils ont été les premiers sur beaucoup de sujets. Hein. Je parle de 2 sujets, mais il y en a beaucoup d'autres à innover avec ces technologies-là. L'autre chose qui est intéressante, c'est qu'effectivement, la révolution la plus avancée, c'est celle de l'argent, on est d'accord, en Afrique. La deuxième révolution sur laquelle on est, dont personne n'a parlé jusqu'à maintenant, c'est le partage du savoir. Pour moi, c'est la révolution actuelle la plus importante, c'est l'accès au savoir. Hein, si vous connaissez une application, par exemple, comme PlanteNet, PlanteNet permet à n'importe quel paysan africain, depuis son champ, de reconnaître une plante en la photographiant et d'avoir tout le savoir du monde sur cette plante. D'accord, donc ces applications d'intermédiation entre le paysan et le savoir du monde, elles sont extrêmement importantes, elles se développent à grande vitesse et elles permettent effectivement à chacun des paysans du monde, voilà, d'être en lien direct avec tout le savoir du monde. C'est assez impressionnant. Et puis la révolution qui arrive, dont on parle assez peu, c'est la révolution de la santé. Parce que là, Google et les autres, là, ils investissent des milliards de dollars pour la santé. Et comme pour les autres révolutions, c'est en Afrique qu'on va développer ça parce que c'est là que c'est le plus facile de contourner ou de pas être tenu par les intérêts corporatistes ou par les législations. Voilà. C'est pas une question.
J'ai deux éléments à souligner. Le premier, c'est par rapport à l'utilisation de la technologie dans le domaine financier. Je ne sais pas ce que Monsieur Alexis pense de cette question. The use of mobile money in Africa. And I don't know what you think about it in Rwanda or another country. Et la deuxième question, c'est par rapport à je ne sais pas si vous connaissez le système de ce qu'on appelait la triple helix. In the 70s, during the oil crisis, I think that the developed countries think about the close cooperation between governments, universities, and companies. Because the countries of Europe don't have oil. And after this crisis, we saw that technological development in Europe and other countries of North of America. And today, I think that we can think about this system in Africa, another system of triple helix cooperation between governments, university for the research, and the companies to develop the technology system. What do you think about it? Thank you.
Yes, I think that, so maybe I go some of these questions. So it's critical. Innovation happens in the private sector. Innovation, what is innovation? Innovation is new product in the market, a new good or service. That happens in most of the time in the private sector. Of course, the government can innovate, provide a new service, a public service, right? Of course, you can have that. But in the majority of the cases, the innovation will come in the private sector. So you need the private sector. So what we call the triple hélice is really to people to understand, and when we think about science, technology, innovation, it's not the linear model where you need to do science and whatever you discover in science, you create a new technology and that new technology will be used for new innovation. No, actually, those are different systems. You can have technology that you don't have the science yet. That happens quite a lot. Actually, we invented the airplane before we have the aerodynamics and the science of that. And we were flying already, so innovation doesn't require new technologies. You can have innovation with traditional technologies. So what is important is to focus on the innovation part. And the most developing countries, when we talk about science, technology, innovation, this is usually hosted in the Ministry of Higher Education, or in Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation, but with a very strong focus on science. And the policy instruments that these ministries have are all related to grants for research, this kind of things. Very far from innovation. Innovation is done, so it's something that has also have the whole of government to do that, right? And then, and when these innovations happen, they transform lives of people in the amazing ways. You see that on innovations like that, the financial inclusion, how can switch so many things. And in that sense, the financing for innovation, right? If you understand that innovation happens in the private sector, a lot of the finance for that has to come from private sector to innovate. Of course, in developing country, you may not need the traditional R&D because a lot of innovation is what many will call imitation or emulation. I prefer emulation because when people say imitation, it sometimes give the impression that is very easy to just bring that what is done in a developed country and now produce in a developing country context. But even though that is something that is already exists, that exists in an environment that is totally different with infrastructure, with the rules, institutions. To be able to produce that in a developing country is an innovation. I prefer though call than emulation. You emulate something. And for that, you need to finance that. How that will happen, right? Of course, the government can support that process. Government in many developing countries is a big buyer. It can do procurement and then can incentivize innovation through procurement. It can incentivize innovation in the private sectors through subsidies, through for consumers. So, for example, when you want to move towards the decarbonization and towards things, you can incentivize the consumer to consume green products or products. So that's one way. So there are other ways that the government can make the finance come through this system. But of course, there is also ways to attract finance, and it would require, there is an important role for development banks in developing countries to finance this kind of innovation, because this is innovation that leads to diversification of the economy. So it's a big social gain to have those innovations. So this is a role of a development bank. For example, a national development bank can do that. The private sector banking system may not be deep enough or very willing to support that. But I would say that in many developing countries that we talk about oil as well and commodities, and in many countries that are, let's say, blessed with the resources, you are cursed also with by the resource. So if you go to many developing countries that in Africa that are exporters of oil, it's the economy has a appreciated exchange rate that makes very difficult to produce anything else in the country, right? So you can have the best, you can have the finance, you can have the infrastructure, we can build the best internet in the country. But if for the private sector doesn't make sense to produce in the country because it's much cheaper to import and to sell to the population, you have an economy of importers and retailers. You will not have this innovation coming. You only import the innovation and use as importers. So you see, there are many things that has to be taken in consideration to have these innovations happening.
Yes, may I come in?
Mr. Gaboni?
Yes, I think I'll first tackle the question of the person who asked a very important question. I think he asked, where is R&D in Africa? I think he even gave a particular example of products that he has himself, and he was asking, where is finance, where is R&D in Africa? I think that's a very good question. That first, it's an African, or it's on a country level that needs to be tackled. Yes, financing innovation, but I think we have to have a bigger picture, because these are choice of the society, where to invest, where to put the resources that the limited resources that the government might have, where to put them. And yes, innovation spaces, hacker spaces, innovation hubs are critical to the future, but also universities, for example, universities are also critical to the development of the country. I think, for example, I think someone mentioned an app or PlantNet, and the person was saying that PlantNet is very easy because any farmer in Africa with a phone can take a photo, and then the app is able to tell about the plant, if I understood it correctly. Yeah, but I think, for example, if you see this PlantNet, it has that capacity of the farmer to use it will depend, for example, on digital literacy that he has. It will depend on the education that he has. It will depend on the capacity to afford the mobile phone, which I'm not saying it's impossible. It is very possible. It can be used, but I'm bringing it back to this question that it is a choice of the society. These are political matters that need to be discussed without necessarily believing that technology is and always a solution or the only solution. There needs to be discussions, because it's always a choice that has to be made. Otherwise, I think I agree with the people that R&D is something that needs to be invested in Africa. There's no question about that. But also, beyond being the choice of a country, a particular country, we are talking of on the level of country. This is also this also sends us to, for example, the international system. I think we are all aware that African countries are always classed as the most risky countries, which makes it for them very difficult to borrow, if they are to borrow, that is. And that makes it very difficult for them to fund whatever they want to fund. I think that financial system, I'm not an expert on the financial system myself, but I'm just helping us to think that these questions are wider, and these are on the national level. They are political decisions that have to be made. And even on the international system, there is an element of unfairness that's built in the system that makes it difficult for the African countries to fund whatever they want to fund after a process of making choices. They fund innovation, which they need to fund because it's the future, but also they have other things that they balance with, as I guess it's with everyone. On the question of the use of mobile money, I think the person asked me what I think about the use of mobile money. I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but generally speaking, I think, yeah, the use of mobile money has really taken off in Rwanda and in Africa in general. And I think it's part because it was able to, they were able to identify the problems, and they didn't, especially companies, I'm talking of, for example, the telecom companies in Rwanda, were able not to jump to higher technology, so to say, without necessarily understanding if people, that's what they need. That's what I was saying, that M-Pesa for the past 5 years, if I remember very well, didn't even have an app, an application for smartphones. It was used by feature phones, by an SSD system, which meant USSD system, which meant people who could afford feature phones that go, for example, for $20, There are phones for $20, even $15 can easily do M-Pesa or mobile money in general. I think this was the success story. That it was that capacity to understand the context and suggest a technology without necessarily jumping to a higher technology, which of course doesn't mean that in the future or even concurrently a higher technology can be proposed. In fact, this differentiation of low technology and high technology, I think I agree with Clovis that I'm a bit uncomfortable making this dichotomy. What I meant is this technology that is able to understand the context. Sometimes for technology to understand the context, it has to be even more sophisticated. It's even more sophisticated technology that understand the context, even if we call them lower technology, because they are serving, they are not as fancy, let's say. They are not necessarily fancy, but they are good technology. So that's what I think. Now, mobile, if you look at the trends of mobile money that is coming, I think there's a lot of things that people want to build on this. There is an element, a lot of credit scoring, for example. In Kenya, M-Pesa has started that. In Rwanda, the banks and even the telecom companies are thinking of credit scoring, which I think I still insist that it needs to be thought and discussed, because there is an element of what it visibilizes, what it shows, and what it doesn't show. The credit score, for example, if it's based on a mobile money transaction, would of course be an interesting thing to do. But for those of you who are familiar with credit scoring, it would, for example, that's just an example that I would mean, it would just mean that for a poor person who transacts less money, whatever mistakes he makes by not, for example, repaying little money, would be counted in terms of percentage. It would be like he made a bigger mistake than a person who is rich, who defaulted on a huge sum of money, but because he has a large set of transactions, it means his credit score will be higher than someone who's poor but made a smaller mistake of little money. Now, that's a choice of society that we need to discuss. That if we do credit scoring in that term, are we putting in the technology capacity to contextualize, for example, those, or do we just take credit scoring and apply it just as a simple mathematical formula that does it to everyone without necessarily seeing those qualitative, as we say, those details that need to be understood. So that's what I would say about mobile money, that it was a success and it has really become a basis that people are thinking of so many things they can do with it. But I would say that we should take time to think, because with technology, we make a lot of choice about society without necessarily taking time to discuss if we really agree that this is what we're gonna do. We have to take technology as a tool and always take time to discuss these choice of society that need to be made for the technology to implement. Maybe to end on a positive note on this, on how technology sometimes hides. It's the tree that hides the forest in terms of choice of society. There was a positive case in the Rwandan setting where there was a land tenure regularization. It was in the area of land, and technology was used to produce a digital cadastre. So in Rwanda, there is a digital cadastre and people can access it on the phone. But the use of technology was based on the capacity, for example, to adjudicate land. There were a lot of discussion, local discussion on who owns what, that were not done necessarily by technology. It was done by setting up local land committees that were able to adjudicate this, especially in the context of Rwanda, because land was a highly contested commodity because of the history of the genocide, even the refugees before the genocide. So asserting who owns what was really, really difficult. But it was done by setting up local committees that were able to do that. And then the digital technology built on that and digitalized the results, let's say. And now the cadastre is digital. So I would always caution, when we use technology, there is a choice of societies that we are making, and we need to discuss those. And sometimes the old analog local discussion and local politics can deal with this, and then the digital comes as a tool to automatize the process, but the process being done by good governance. Thank you.
I have two questions. Don't you think that from what we said for this roundtable and the former one, African states has to be innovative on the governance side? And a good one, what would be the African innovation hub would look like on your dream?
So the first one is about governance, right? So innovations in governance. Yes, for sure. Particularly when we think about the adoption of technology, as I have been discussing more broadly in the productive sectors and things like that, there are in countries, there are different constituencies. There may be winners and losers. You may be promoting one certain new areas, so resources are scarce. You cannot really promote everything at the same time. So there are conflicting interests that need to be addressed. So it's one part of governance that I think is very important, is the political economy of this innovation. Okay. So when it comes at the highest level in the countries, then you see that's possible to do quite a lot of change. So one innovation on the governance for sure is this higher level drive and push and champion of this innovation, new technology use that is really for diversification of the economies and so on, and catch up. Your last question is what would be the dream, right? So for this innovation, I would say that when I think about innovation, and I see we tend to try to put that in an innovation hub, right? The innovation hub for sure is great for startups, for certain aspects of the or certain size of company or timing of the innovation process. But we should think about innovation in a broad sense on adoption of these technologies broadly in the productive sector. So I see innovation much bigger than that. So what I will not see as a hub, as on one single place to see, but I would like to see in Africa would be a dream to see cities that are very dynamic, that innovate quite a lot, that you see new things coming up, new things that are new to the city, but may not new to the world, but they are using new technology to help on that. So I would like to see the dynamism, these new things coming up. And I lived 10 years in Asia. I'm from Latin America, but I lived 10 years in Asia, and I saw that in several cities in Asia. You know, you see that in a country like Vietnam, growing quite fast, other countries doing that as well. That kind of dynamism is what would be a dream to see in many places in Africa.
And on your dream of the new African innovation age, Mr. Gaboni?
Yes, I completely agree with Clovis that the idea of a hub is a limited one. Innovation has to be across the sectors, and to me, it would be a system that is integrated in the education system of a country, in the curriculum, for example, where people are given digital literacy at the early age. It would be a system that responds to the contextual problems, that is able to understand the contextual problems without hiding the choice of the society in the technology, but rather waiting for the decision of the society that are made, and then produce apps or products, digital products that respond to that. And it would be a system that gives value to the collective effort, not yes, individual geniuses, but also the collective effort that are put into innovation. And on your first question, I think you touched a very good, you touched the sweet spot. You asked, based on the discussion, I think it's true that African countries needs to innovate in terms of governance. That is definitely true. But I wouldn't want to see this as an African problem. I think the digital era invites everyone to innovate in terms of governance, to think how either traditional choices of societies that have already been made are challenged by the digital turn that we are in, or that how new things, new innovations that are brought by technology need to be discussed, need to be governed by coming up with systems that are not too restrictive, but also not too permissive. Maybe if I end by an example, there is this thing that they call the regulation sandbox, where the regulated and the regulator come together and discuss the regulation. I think it's one of the ways that not just African countries, but more or less everyone could innovate in terms of governance in technology. So not just an African problem, definitely an African problem, but not just in Africa, but around the world. Everyone needs to innovate in terms of governance in the digital era. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you too. Next one.
Thank you, dear Clovis, dear Alexis, for your communication. And I think that if we can have 1 or 3 ideas about this publication, first, you must develop a technology in Africa, not only use technology, but produce technology. And I think that it's very important to see how we can have ethical and political reflection in technology in Africa. I think about the 3 points with Clovis. It's I think it's diversify economy by technology. Use technology to change the process in every areas, e-governance, e-consumption. And the last is to see the new technology by innovation, great technology. And I think that if we can have a reflection with these points, technology can help Africa to develop itself. So thank you.